Hello, friends. Good morning and welcome to the Block Thrasher Daily Crypto Update, where we are simplifying cryptocurrency, trying to shatter the complexities with news, commentary, analysis, and education. It's a rainy day here. Things are a little bit melancholy at best. Yes, and the entire market is in a period of ravelment. That's right, ravelment. It can't decide what's going on. It's totally confused. Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we moving sideways? What is happening? Just this morning, looking at CoinGecko.com to see what's happening with the total market cap. The market cap was up a couple percentage points. But now, just an hour or two later, we're down 1.4%. And there is pretty much red across the board. Bitcoin had seen a little bit of an increase, a nice increase. It was touching 37, 38, I think, just an hour or two ago. And now it is down again back to 36,779. So yes, it's confusing. Trying to predict this thing could cause one to pull their hair out. Ravelment, R-A-V-E-L-M-E-N-T, our word of the day. It means entanglement, confusion, ravelment. All right, let's just look at the rest of the market and see what's happening. Ethereum is also down 3.7% overnight to 2,489. Getting my tongue twisted there for a second. Binance down 3%. 3.5% to 353. Cardano down 5.3% to $1.53. Dogecoin down 2% to 32 cents. XRP down 3% to 86 cents. Polkadot is the only coin in the top 10 that is not down in the last 24 hours. It is currently up 3.6% to $23.34. Not bad for Polkadot. Uniswap down 3%, $23.80, and Bitcoin Cash is down 3.3% to $603. As you can see, the total market is just moving in tandem right now. So, everything's down 3-4%. Solana down 4.4% to $40.84. And Solana is actually the only coin at the moment to still be enjoying a gain on the week. Everything else is down. The alts are down between 8.4% with Ethereum down to 14% with Uniswap. Everything else, 15%, sorry, 23% with Dogecoin, 13% with Cardano. So everything's between 10 and 15% or 8 to 15% in that range in the red for the week. So it has not been a good 7 days for the cryptocurrency space. Of course, this is not anything to freak out about or to panic about. It's not 20 or 30%. Well, except for in the case of Dogecoin. But this is something that we're not used to. And if you're in the cryptocurrency space, you gotta have an iron gut. However, in spite of the fact that the market is down here, there's good news. There's good news all over the place. Actually, almost every single news item today is positive and bullish. Let's just take a look. Let's jump in, dive in right now and take a look at some of what those stories are. First in is India is reportedly planning to classify Bitcoin as an asset class. Now, there's no country in the world that has flip-flopped back and forth as much as India over in recent years. It's this repeating cycle of stories where one day they're going to ban it completely, and then the next day somebody's like, well, no, maybe not. There's some sort of regulator, and then back and forth and back and forth. So the latest is that the Indian government might soon give a clear direction on Bitcoin with a possibility of classifying the cryptocurrency as an asset class, which makes sense. I mean, almost every other country that has addressed the cryptocurrency issue or Bitcoin has classified it as an asset class, with a couple of exceptions in which they have outright banned it completely on the one side and the negative, or as we saw with El Salvador recently and with Japan in the past, a couple of countries have even gone so far as to make it legal tender. The Security and Exchange Board of India, known as the SEBI, is reportedly planning to handle the regulatory aspect of cryptocurrencies once Bitcoin is classified as an asset class. Sources close to the matter told New India Express. Previously, the state had hinted at a hostile stand towards cryptocurrencies while alluding to strict regulation of the sector. The sources add that the finance ministry is holding talks on regulation with leaders in the crypto industry. Consequently, the Indian parliament will have a cryptocurrency regulation bill that seeks to spell out new directions on handling cryptocurrencies. India will likely join other jurisdictions like El Salvador in defining the sector. Recently, the South American country officially considered Bitcoin as currency. Some crypto analysts note that there is minimal possibility India will consider Bitcoin as legal tender, and that's definitely would be a huge shock if India were to do such a thing. Really, so the thing of it is, just to address that issue really quickly, the countries that are going to potentially consider cryptocurrency or Bitcoin as legal tender would be the countries that are most depressed by the current global monetary regime. And if you listened to the podcast yesterday, I talked about that quite a bit. And there's more news today. There's more stories about that, and it has to relate with the IMF and with El Salvador. Those would be the countries whose currencies have failed, the countries who have seen their sovereignty as nations chipped away through the actions of the international monetary, I'll just call it a cabal, whether it be the IMF, giving them a loan with all types of strings and attachments and requirements that become very difficult for them to meet, or other pressures that are applied, whether it be through sanctions or other actions from Western states or even the United States. And there's a story today about Iran where we're going to look at that. And so there's this very interesting global dynamic developing where you have a lot of countries that are neutral. You have a lot of countries that are starting to talk again, throw out a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, talking about the issues of their concerns about money laundering, as if money laundering didn't exist until Bitcoin came into existence a little over a decade ago, right? It's just asinine. Even today, the primary source of money laundering is with fiat currencies, not with cryptocurrencies. But anyway, I digress. Obviously, so they're talking about money laundering and they're talking about tax evasion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, as if tax evasion or, what's the, I'm blanking on the concept that I was trying to think of at the moment, but you've got tax evasion where you're completely trying to play, tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is fine because that's not illegal, but tax evasion is illegal. But anyway, as if tax evasion and tax avoidance and all of that didn't exist prior to cryptocurrencies. Yeah, no. And the ironic thing about that is most cryptocurrencies, most blockchains are completely public, and through chain analysis, the transactions can actually be traced more easily, generally speaking, than they could with fiat currencies, with cash, or even through the banking system. Because you know what? Think about the work that's required. Let's say you're banking through JP Morgan Chase and you're committing some sort of money laundering or something like that. The IRS or whatever it is that's investigating that, the FBI or whatever government agency, the SEC, whoever, you name it, whatever three-letter acronym, what are they called? Agency that's trying to get that information has to go and subpoena the private company, get that information. Well, the blockchain, they don't have to do that, right? It's all out there, public on the ledger. But anyway, that aside from the point, there's this sort of interesting thing that's happening globally between the nation states, where you have countries like El Salvador who've been under the thumb of the IMF, but yet still going to seek money from the IMF. And there's a story we're going to look at that here next. And Iran, obviously, who's being sanctioned by the United States and by the West, and others who are looking to cryptocurrency as a way to get out from under the what obviously they would consider to be the oppression that is wrought upon them through the monetary system. And then you have countries like China who are outright banning it instead, but then clearly China not suffering from necessarily suffering from the current global monetary system. They've been able to, because of their size, actually use it to their advantage, right? Where they have manipulated their currency for a long time. But anyway, there's this international thing going on where, the thing that keeps popping into my mind is, it's good on the one hand, what happens in the El Salvadors and the Irans and stuff like that. It's good for adoption. It's good. It's definitely good from the standpoint of for their people. It's good to give them a hard currency like Bitcoin, where it can't be printed into oblivion, where it can't be inflated and strip the wealth of the nation or the people, where the people have the opportunity to actually build and store wealth and not be manipulated even through the taxation system as well and all these sorts of things. So a lot of good, a lot of positive, a lot of freedom, stuff like that. Yeah, sure, there's risk currently because the market is still volatile. But the concern is that these types of things, especially when you have a nation state like Iran talking about it, is that it could allow regulators in the West to classify Bitcoin as sort of this rogue currency that's being used by the rogue nation states around the country who don't want to play ball, who don't want to comply with the demands of the United States and the rest of the Western world, right? So it's an interesting thing that's happening. And another thing that's going to be fascinating to watch as we move forward. Some crypto analysts, going back to the story here, note that there's minimal possibility India will consider Bitcoin as legal tender. Quote, in my opinion, the Indian government will explore a way to regulate or regularize Bitcoin. I don't think India will consider accepting Bitcoin as a legal tender in the near future because it will affect the position of the Indian rupee. Accepting Bitcoin as a legal tender is a good idea for those nations who don't have their own currency or are dependent on the US dollar, said Hitesh Malviya, who apparently is an Indian crypto analyst. Yes, blockchain and crypto investment expert. Yeah, that makes sense. I actually would agree with what he's saying. Sure, you have these nation states such as El Salvador whose currencies have failed, and so they have become dependent on the US dollar, and as such, they are subject to the actions of the United States, and they would definitely benefit from switching to Bitcoin. And so that's why they're doing that. India's softening stand on Bitcoin and crypto. The biggest hint that the government might change its stance on cryptocurrencies came after the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, announced that the banks could not use its 2018 order. The order banned banks from dealing with cryptocurrency transactions. According to the RBI, the 2018 circular was invalidated from the date the Supreme Court overruled the decision to ban banks from supporting crypto transactions. Wow. Furthermore, some leading crypto exchanges are monitoring the Indian market to set up a base. United States-based Kraken, Hong Kong's Bitfinex, and KuCoin are reportedly looking at the market. Analysts in the sector expect the Indian market to grow in the coming years. I've been to India a couple times. It's been a number of years now. What an incredible place, though. And the people there are just phenomenal. Yet they have their problems, granted. And of late, unfortunately, the government there has been trending more toward clamping down on freedoms rather than increasing freedoms or moving in more democratic ways. That said, there is huge potential there. A lot of the people in India are very well educated. A lot of doctors and lawyers coming out of India, and computer programmers and developers. And it certainly would make sense for the nation of India to allow those individuals to create innovation and opportunity to build wealth and to bring wealth. And listen, the crypto space is only going to continue to expand and grow, and it would make a lot of sense for the Indian government and the regulators over there to allow for India to take part in that and to capture a lot of that wealth. It seems to me that India would actually be poised very well. I mean, many US companies outsource their application development to India. So it seems like a really great natural fit is something they need to do. All right, continuing on with this story, the IMF is not happy about El Salvador's Bitcoin bombshell. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And there's much more news coming out today regarding the same issue. The International Monetary Fund sees financial and legal issues with El Salvador's big decision to become the world's first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, Reuters reports. And isn't this interesting? This is actually great because this entire event is very demonstrative of the fact that I've been trying to communicate, spent a bunch of time trying to communicate yesterday, that these institutions like the IMF and the global monetary system want to wield influence and control and strip these smaller countries of their sovereignty. See, and just the statement itself that the International Monetary Fund sees financial and legal issues with El Salvador's big decision, that's interesting. I mean, how is it that a sovereign nation, a president and a Congress of a nation passes a bill to use something as their legal tender and an outside, international institution, which isn't even another nation state, is like, oh, there might be a legal problem with this. Really? How so? Let's see what they had to say here. IMF spokesperson Gary Rice claims that the organization will closely follow those developments while adding that cryptocurrencies can come with, quote, significant risks. Crypto assets can pose, he said, significant risks, and effective regulatory measures are very important when dealing with them. Okay, whatever. It means nothing. It's interesting. Do they see themselves now, the IMF, as a policing agency? Typically they're more, what they are is more of a lender, right? A lender to these countries, which is a very cleverly devised system. We talked about it yesterday. It's almost like a mafia system where they'll lend you money and they lend you just enough that you're dependent on that and you better comply with the rules that are set, right? President Nayib Bukele said that he would have a Bitcoin-related conversation with the IMF this Thursday. That will be interesting to see if we get any news regarding that. El Salvador has been in talks to secure a $1.3 billion loan from the IMF to stimulate its economy following Bukele's landslide win in early March. Okay, now here's the interesting thing. Actually, before I comment on that, let's just move on because there might be a little bit more that I want to bring from this. The first domino to fall. El Salvador approved Bukele's Bitcoin bill with a supermajority vote earlier this week, which was widely seen as a watershed moment for the entire crypto industry. Once the decree comes into effect, all merchants will be required by law to accept Bitcoin. Goods can also be paid either in crypto or in the US dollar, right? Bitcoin now shows up as the tropical country's official currency alongside the US dollar on its Wikipedia page. Now, here's another interesting point. Immigrants can obtain permanent residency by investing 3 Bitcoin, equal to currently about $110,000, at the time of writing into the country's economy and products or service. This is brilliant. So here's the thing. Think about this for a second. Right now, El Salvador is knocking on the door of the IMF and saying, we need $1.3 billion, please, to help it and stimulate our economy. See, here's the crazy thing about this. Okay, think about this. The United States wants to stimulate our economy. So what do? Oh, we're just going to spend $6 trillion, right? $6 trillion. Think of that in relation to 1.3 billion, right? I mean, what is that? I'd have to run the math, but I mean, there's a $100 billion in a trillion. There's, 600. Oh man, massive. It just dwarfs it. It's orders of magnitude larger, right? So we can do that though, because we've got the central bank, the Federal Reserve, we got our own currency and all sort of thing, which kind of is dominant. It's the world's reserve currency still, whatever. And it's just it's not no small number though. It's not just like a drop in the bucket. I mean, when you've got a total debt of 35 or 36 and you're going to throw another $6 trillion in it or whatever, that's huge. It's massively huge. But that said, this country, and I love that this is happening because this is a great way to demonstrate and illustrate the way all this stuff works. The country of El Salvador, they can't do that. They don't have their own currency that's controlled by their own central bank that's printing money, right? And, so instead they are restrained. They have restraint because they're using the US dollar and they're using Bitcoin now. So what are they doing? So they're seeking a loan, see, which is the way, it's really kind of the way it should be, because then they have to answer. I mean, it's the way it should be. It's the way it should be, not in the sense like in the way it's going for them. It's not good to go to the IMF and to get a loan, because then they lose their sovereignty and they have to submit to the dictates of the IMF, right? But what I'm trying to say is the way it should be. It's the way it should be, in that governments should be restrained. They should not have this power to spend unlimited amounts of money through a very, what the word I'm looking for? Intentionally obscure monetary system that allows them to pass the consequences and the negative effects and ramifications of their actions of printing excessive amounts of currency down onto their people, right? Which essentially becomes an invisible tax. So El Salvador can't do that. So El Salvador has to go to the IMF, knock on the door. And the IMF is dealing in currencies that are fiat from the West, right? And so this is just money that gets created out of nothing. And this is this whole system that allows for the United States and the rest of the West to wield influence upon these nations. So here's the thing, though. This is where I was trying to go with this. Bukalele's come up with this great idea where he says, well, look, hey, if you want to bring your cryptocurrency business here, we're going to give you immediate residency if you invest 3 Bitcoin, $110,000 into our economy in some form. It could be through any product or service. And we're going to give you, there'll be no capital gains tax because it's a legal tender, and no income tax, et cetera, whatever. So it wouldn't be that difficult to raise $1.3 billion in that method, I wouldn't think. Or to stimulate the economy, maybe even in a greater than $1.3 billion in the loan from the IMF. So it'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen here. Will the IMF be able to strong arm El Salvador into capitulating and dropping Bitcoin as a legal tender in order to receive the loan? Or will El Salvador, if that is a demand that the IMF brings, say, no, thank you. We'll figure it out. We'll find some other way to do it. We shall see, right? In a similar way, Iran, moving on to our next story, is set to legalize crypto as soon as possible, says the president of Iran. Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, has suggested they want to legalize crypto as soon as possible, stating at a meeting of the government's Economic Coordination Board, quote, for legalizing the activity of cryptocurrencies and protecting people's capital in this area, we must think of a solution as soon as possible and lay down and communicate the necessary laws and infrastructure. Iran has not implemented any regulatory framework for cryptos, but last year they changed the law to use Bitcoin for imports. Since 2018, the country has attracted primarily Chinese miners due to its then cheap energy and its vicinity with a crypto-hostile China. That, however, is apparently putting pressure on their grid, with Iran suspending crypto mining until the end of summer. Quote, Rouhani, the president, said this: the ministries of communication and information technology and energy are responsible for cutting off power to these centers. The president, however, implied that was quite different from cryptos themselves, calling for cooperation. He said, quote, the responsible agencies in the field of capital markets should cooperate with the media and cyberspace in the field of information, education, and public awareness about this phenomenon and its instructions and laws. Iran is to have presidential elections next week, with it unclear what the stance of the new administration will be on cryptos. As you can imagine, initially they'll be quite busy with a lot of other things, but Bitcoin is clearly in strategic interest of a sanctioned Iran, so it may well be just a matter of degrees of warm or neutral. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll see what goes on with Bitcoin. Here's an interesting story out of Cointelegraph about how the G7 nations have come together to talk about a global corporate tax rate. And the question is, will this have an impact on crypto? I don't want to talk that much about this. Maybe we'll look at it just briefly here. At a meeting in London earlier this month, the finance ministers from the G7, the United States, Japan, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and Canada, unanimously agreed to begin creating the framework for a global corporate tax rate. Now let me just explain what's going on here. You know, for a long time, I've speculated that if you're okay with the idea of taxation, where do the limits, where do the limits end? If you're a socialist, let's say, and you believe in the idea that the wealthy should be taxed to provide for the poor, one path that takes you down is, if you're in the United States, what is considered poor is, relative to the rest of the world, very wealthy, right? So if one were to be actually fair and have a globalist view, it would be completely within reason that at some point in time, there should be a global tax to transfer the wealth from nations like the United States to the poorer countries around the world so that those people could live in similar comfort. Correct? And so when you first read this, it sort of sounds like, are we talking about a new global corporate tax? That's not actually what's going on here. What's going on here, and it's just the G7. So this doesn't actually include the entire world. China is not part of this. Russia is not part of it. It's just the G7. But they're coming together and they're saying, look, let's agree to impose the same tax rate on these multinational companies. So your Amazons, your Apples, your Googles, who currently operate in some of these countries, but then set up headquarters in other countries, and then they transfer money from one country to another country to avoid taxation. And they do it in such a way that many of them pay almost no tax on money that's made outside the United States or overseas. And so the idea here is to all agree, these countries to agree that they're going to have to pay, and that they're going to have to pay an amount, a percentage that they agree on, and basically shut down these loopholes. Now, depending on how you view things, this is negative or positive. Now, some people, if they are those who love government and believe that the government is wonderful and altruistic in making our lives better through all of its spending, etc., programs, social, whatnot, probably strongly believe that this is a good thing and that we need to tax these corporations. And I tell you what, in all fairness, from a moral standpoint and an ethical standpoint, it would be good in that it's not fair or right for the burden to be placed primarily upon smaller companies and individuals within these countries to pay the tax burden. But that's, and when these other massively huge corporations are able to avoid it, right? Tax avoidance. But that sort of misses the bigger point that at some point, one has to look at what's going on and say, okay, the amount of money that is going back to these governments in the form of taxation, and also in the form of them just spending, increasing debt, which negatively impacts the purchasing power of the currency. At some point, they just don't need any more, right? So the real solution wouldn't be to shut down and to close this door basically on corporations, but to just reduce taxation for everybody across the board. Now we're getting into the whole, political thing of taxation and whatnot, which isn't what we're really here to talk about. But this story is asking, will this have an issue, have some influence on cryptocurrencies? So the author says, with the inevitable introduction of these new pillars, we have to ask ourselves, how could this impact crypto companies? Crypto at its core is truly international. It also moves money around the globe and targets an international audience. As a consequence, purely by its operation, it falls under what many believe will be the new rules relating to the taxation of international companies. Note, international companies literally means companies that have multiple locations or do business in multiple countries. The implementation of these new rules is yet to be confirmed, and as to exactly how this will look, many are still unsure. The feeling is that crypto companies who operate internationally will have to do one of two things: either be prepared to pay a corporate domestic rate of 16% all over the globe, or move their physical location to a truly international location. To be clear, this would have to be more than simply a registered office. In reality, we would see the death of companies based out of locations such as the Seychelles or British Virgin Islands with real offices in New York. You know who they are. Likewise, the service company based in the United States with the head company based offshore may also be subject to some changing around. In the future, it is possible we will see companies that will be purely based out of their locations, such as the British Virgin Islands, with the team physically conducting businesses there. And then the author points out it's not so universal after all, as I was mentioning, because there's still a bunch of places like Singapore, for instance, which is one of the number one places that crypto companies are going to set up business, are not part of the G7 and would not be subject to this agreement. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, this just illustrates how there's a movement right now within governments, and it's a global movement, to ensure that the nation states are able to capture, in the form of taxation, as much revenue as possible to fund their operations. Moving on, Coinbase to offer crypto exposure with 401k provider. This is great. This is cool. This is good news. Fantastic. Thanks to a collaboration between Coinbase and For Us All, Americans will now be able to invest up to 5% of their 401k portfolio in crypto. Now, hopefully, we will see that this is just the beginning of such moves. It would be great to see more and more 401k providers partnering with Coinbase or other exchanges to allow citizens to invest part of their 401k portfolio in cryptocurrency. There's a ton of money, billions and billions of dollars that are in the 401k space that could go into crypto. Just for instance, For Us All has 70,000 employees and holds 1.7 billion in assets under management. So all of those then could potentially be able to put up to 5% of their 401k into cryptocurrency. Good stuff. Also, more positive news. A Basel Committee has classified Bitcoin as high risk for banks. Now, when you first read that headline, that doesn't sound particularly bullish, but this actually is. Let's look at the rest of it. The Basel Committee for the world's leading central banks proposed a maximum capital requirement for crypto exposure because of risk arising from price volatility and money laundering. So the Banking Committee suggests prudence for crypto. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision published a report Thursday addressing the risks posed by cryptocurrencies. The report proposed conservative prudential treatment for crypto assets. The Basel Committee's members include the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, Deutsche Bundesbank, and the Bank of France, among others. Do you see this? It's just incredible as we go through and read these stories and talk about these things every day. It's incredible how much collusion occurs. You just can't deny it. And I think most Americans don't understand or think about or even probably even care, to be quite frank, about any of this, because they just go about living their lives. They work their jobs, they make their money. All they know is that there's a hard world out there and they're trying to build wealth and they're struggling, and some succeed, but many others are living paycheck to paycheck, and they see the cost of everything going up. They see their taxes going up. They see they can't pay their property taxes. They're struggling, right? And and they don't dig deep. They don't have the time or the energy to research and find out how the world works and what's going on. But yet there's all these things. Here's another. So this banking committee in Basel, Switzerland. Who's it made up of? Committee members include U.S. Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Deutsche Bundesbank, Bank of France, and others. And this is just one of them. This committee. I mean, there's also the Bank of International Settlements, and we've been talking about the IMF and the World Bank, and it just goes on and on and on. And they get together and they collude and they plan and they... Anyway, side note. The report stated that cryptocurrencies pose global, quote, global financial stability concerns and risks to the banking system in the absence of specified prudential treatment. Now, how the hell is that even possible? The total cryptocurrency market capitalization is like $1.6 trillion right now. $1.6 trillion. You know what? Let's just Google this. I want to know, because it changes so fast. What is the current U.S. debt? Let's get that number. What is the current U.S. debt? 2.3 trillion as of February 2020. Yeah, that's not right. U.S. national debt clock. U.S. national debt, $28,389,000,000. U.S. total debt, unfunded debt, $86 trillion. What comes after a trillion? Because we're getting close. Student loan debt, $1 trillion. And somehow, $1.6 trillion market of cryptocurrency threatens the global financial stability. Asinine is that? It's ridiculous. I'll tell you why it threatens them. It threatens them because they can't control it, because they can't manipulate it. So the report stated that cryptocurrencies pose global financial stability concerns and risks to the banking system in the absence of a specified prudential treatment. This is the second draft of the prudence proposal put forward by the committee in the last 2 years. The group classified crypto assets into two categories, one for traditional securities and fiat-backed stablecoins, and another for cryptocurrencies with no assets backing them. The Basel Committee recommended the regular Basel framework for the first category, which also applies to traditional commodities. The second group was flagged as, quote, high risk, and the body urged maximum caution, including a suggested capital requirement of 12,050%. Banks are required to set aside adequate capital to cover losses from activities such as lending. The capital requirement is different for various classes of assets. For instance, the requirement is lower for real estate than oil-backed securities. While partnerships between traditional banking services and crypto businesses are currently few and far between, the Basel Committee has highlighted its concerns that some banks might engage with the space in the future. El Salvador's recent move to make Bitcoin legal tender and the support of other Latin American leaders speaks volumes of this rising interest. Basel Committee has invited comments on the matter till September 10th. The reason this is bullish, though, is because what's happening here is the groundwork is being laid for the banks to be involved in cryptocurrency. And so while it sounds like a lot of what they're saying is very negative because they're saying, well, it's risky and there's got to be a lot of capital to back what's going on, what the banks are doing, et cetera, which is quite, it's very hilarious when you think about it, because we've had, during the great financial crisis, we basically had to bail out almost all the banks because they were totally risky in the mortgage-backed securities that they were buying and selling, et cetera. And everybody knows that story. And it's like, yeah. So it's ridiculous. As some people I saw posted in one forum talking about this particular subject, they were like, no, it should be that every bank has to hold one Bitcoin to back their, $35,000 of whatever deposits they're supposed to have or something to this effect. Yeah. Obviously quite comical. But that said, it's positive. Okay, friends, I think that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate tuning in. and thinking through some crypto things with me and taking a look at what's happening in the cryptocurrency space as we make an attempt to simplify all of this as much as possible. I hope you have a phenomenal week. The rest of this week, we're kind of drawing to a close here. And stay strong. Don't capitulate. Don't lose faith. Be encouraged. Know that the trend is still toward adoption. There's a lot of good news. Market cap has been pretty steady, pretty stable. The total market cap right around $1.5 to $1.6 trillion, which is where we're currently at, 1.63. And yeah, there's been a little bit rough. There's been a little bit of blood in the streets. There's a little bit of red, a lot of red. However, things are not that bad. Actually looking quite good. I'm encouraged. I hope you're encouraged as well. And we will talk to you tomorrow. All right. Appreciate you. See you then. Bye now.